It began on a quiet Thursday evening, the kind of evening when the world outside slows down but inside a home, silence feels heavier than words. Mark had always trusted his wife, Julia. Married for over a decade, they had shared laughter, tears, and the simple routines that made up a family life in the suburbs of the United States. But that night, something gnawed at him. Julia had texted earlier, saying she had to stay late at the office, overtime again, she wrote, followed by a small heart emoji, as if to soften the disappointment of another lonely dinner at home. Mark wanted to believe her, but a faint unease crept in, a whisper that maybe there was more to her story than long hours at work. Julia, on the other hand, had her own reasons. At 35, she was a successful professional, admired by colleagues, respected by friends, and adored by her children. Yet beneath her composed smile and perfectly balanced schedule, she carried a secret. A secret that had begun innocently, casual conversations over coffee, late-night laughs with a coworker who seemed to understand her in ways her husband sometimes didn't. What started as friendship had crossed a line Julia never imagined she'd approach. And now, every time she said overtime, her heart raced for reasons far from deadlines and meetings. This story is not just about lies, it's about the hidden cracks in relationships, the choices we make when we crave more than routine, and the cost of secrets in a marriage built on trust. Viewers, what do you think? Is it possible to love someone deeply and still betray them? Can one kiss or one moment of weakness truly unravel years of love and loyalty? Comment below if you believe Julia's actions were a mistake she can come back from, or if Mark's suspicions will eventually shatter their world forever. As we dive deeper into She Said Overtime. But her affair told a different story. Prepare yourself for romance tangled in secrecy, suspense that will keep you guessing, and a revelation that will change everything. Because sometimes, the truth doesn't just hurt, it destroys. Julia's life had always looked perfect from the outside. A stable marriage, 2 beautiful kids, a lovely suburban home, and a career that gave her financial independence. But the truth was more complicated. Somewhere between the late nights at work and the endless responsibilities at home, she had started to feel invisible. Mark loved her, yes, but their conversations had become shorter, their moments together filled with silence rather than connection. When Eric, a younger colleague with an easy smile and attentive eyes, began to notice the small details about her, the new earrings, the tired look in her eyes, the way she always brought her coffee without sugar, it awakened something Julia thought she had lost. Their connection grew slowly, almost too naturally. At first, it was harmless jokes over lunch breaks. Then came the late evenings when everyone else had left the office, and she found herself leaning in just a little closer when Eric spoke. He was only 28, confident yet warm, someone who carried none of the weariness Mark did after years of bills and responsibilities. Julia told herself it was friendship, nothing more. But when Eric's hand brushed against hers one evening, the air between them shifted, and she couldn't deny what her heart was racing to tell her. Meanwhile, Mark had started to notice small changes. Julia's perfume lingered stronger when she returned home, her phone was suddenly always face down on the table, and she laughed at texts she never explained. He wanted to trust her, but doubts crept in late at night when he lay awake alone. Was it really just overtime, or was something else pulling her away? Viewers, if you were in Mark's shoes, would you confront Julia immediately, or wait until you had proof? Share your thoughts in the comments. This is where the story begins to test the strength of trust and temptation. Mark's doubts grew heavier with each passing day. Julia had always been predictable, her routine set like clockwork. But now, she stayed late at the office more often, returning home with an energy that didn't match the excuse of overtime. Her eyes carried a spark, one that he hadn't seen in years, and though it should have made him happy, it only deepened his unease. He began noticing small inconsistencies, receipts for dinners she never mentioned, a faint cologne on her jacket that wasn't his. He wanted to believe it was stress or coincidence, but his gut whispered otherwise. Julia, meanwhile, found herself torn between two worlds. At home, she forced smiles and carried on with the role of a devoted wife, but inside, her heart was restless. Eric's attention was intoxicating. He listened when she spoke, remembered details about her childhood, and made her feel alive again. Yet, every time she looked at Mark, guilt tightened around her chest. He was still the man who had held her hand through every struggle, the father of her children, the one who promised forever. But could forever survive if she was no longer the same woman he married? Adding to the tension, Eric began pushing the boundaries. What started as lingering looks and accidental touches turned into late-night conversations filled with words Julia wasn't ready to hear. He wanted more, and Julia could sense the moment approaching when she'd have to make a choice. For the viewers, if you were in Julia's position, would you follow the temptation of passion, or protect the bond built on years of trust? Comment below, your thoughts might mirror the exact storm she is caught in. Mark's unease reached its breaking point one rainy Friday evening. Julia had promised she'd be home by 8, but as the clock struck 10, he sat in the living room with the lights dimmed, his heart pounding louder than the storm outside. He replayed her words in his mind, overtime, don't wait up, but something about the way she said it gnawed at him. Her phone had been buzzing more often, locked tighter than ever, and every smile she gave him now seemed rehearsed. The warmth between them had thinned, leaving behind silence that screamed louder than any argument. Julia, on the other hand, stood frozen in her car just a block away from their home. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, torn between walking inside and facing Mark or turning the key and driving toward Eric. The thrill of their secret burned inside her, but so did the guilt. She could almost see Mark sitting there, waiting, his patience disguising the storm within him. She hated herself for wanting two worlds, one filled with stability and the other with dangerous passion. The tension grew thicker when Julia finally stepped inside. The faint smell of coffee lingered, and Mark's shadow loomed from the couch. His eyes didn't move from her face, searching for answers she wasn't ready to give. The room was charged, every breath heavy, every second feeling like the calm before an explosion. What would happen if Mark spoke first? Would Julia confess everything, or spin another story about late nights at the office? And what if Eric called at that very moment, shattering the fragile silence with undeniable truth? Viewers, what do you think Julia should do now, face the fire or keep hiding? Mark stared at Julia for what felt like forever, his silence speaking louder than any accusation. Just when Julia opened her mouth to offer another excuse about overtime, his phone buzzed on the table. Both of them froze. Mark reached for it slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. The name flashing across the screen made Julia's heart stop, Eric. The very name she had been trying to keep hidden now appeared in the one place she couldn't control. The silence was shattered, not by words, but by the undeniable truth staring back at them. Julia tried to grab the phone, her voice trembling, "It's not what you think." But Mark pulled it back, his jaw tightening as the storm inside him boiled over. He didn't answer the call, but the damage was already done. The air grew heavier, their once loving home now a battlefield of suspicion and half-truths. Mark demanded an explanation, his tone sharp yet broken, while Julia's heart raced as she scrambled to keep the delicate balance of her double life intact. And then, just as tension reached its peak, another twist landed like lightning. Eric sent a message. Bold words appeared on the screen: "I can't wait anymore. Tonight or never." Julia's world collapsed in that instant. Mark read it aloud, his voice cracking with disbelief. The romantic fantasy she had been living outside her marriage was now standing in the middle of their living room, undeniable and cruel. But instead of exploding in rage, Mark did something unexpected. He stood up, walked to the window, and whispered, "I knew something was wrong, but I never imagined this." His restraint only made Julia's guilt sharper. For the first time, she saw the pain in his silence, the heartbreak of a man who had given her everything, only to find himself shut out of her world. The conflict had deepened beyond repair. Julia's secret was no longer a private escape, it was a choice that demanded resolution. And now, with Eric waiting and Mark broken but unyielding, she stood at the edge of a decision that would forever change all three lives. Viewers, if you were in Julia's place, what would you do? Choose the thrill of passion or the stability of love? Julia's hands trembled as she watched Mark clutch the phone tighter. The silence between them was louder than any shouting could ever be. Finally, she whispered, "I never wanted to hurt you." Her words hung in the air, fragile and uncertain. Mark turned, his eyes red but sharp, and said, "Then why did you?" The truth was no longer something she could hide. The secret that once felt thrilling had now become unbearable. With her voice breaking, Julia confessed everything: the late nights, the stolen moments, the feelings she thought she had under control but couldn't stop. Tears streamed down her face as she admitted she had let the comfort of stability and the lure of romance collide until it destroyed the life they had built together. Mark stood still, every word cutting deeper, but he listened. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He just let her truth weigh heavy in the room. And then came the twist. Just as Julia finished, Mark showed her another message on his phone. It wasn't from Eric, it was from someone Julia didn't recognize. Mark's own secret unfolded. He too had been living with doubts, finding comfort in someone else's words, though he never acted on it. The revelation stunned Julia, shifting the blame and pain into something more complicated than betrayal alone. For a brief moment, they both realized they had drifted so far from each other that strangers had filled the gaps they once filled for themselves. The climax wasn't about choosing one person over another, it was about facing the truth that love without honesty cannot survive. Their eyes met, not as enemies, but as two broken hearts finally forced to see the cracks that had been there all along. Julia wiped her tears as Mark sank into the chair across from her. For the first time, the house felt painfully quiet, stripped of its laughter, stripped of the warmth they once took for granted. What lingered between them now was not just betrayal but a heavy awareness of how far apart they had grown. Julia reached for his hand, trembling, unsure if he would pull away. To her surprise, Mark didn't. His grip was firm, not in love, but in recognition of the years they had shared, the memories that still tied them together, even as their hearts pulled in opposite directions. They talked until the morning light poured in, finally admitting the truths they had both ignored. Julia confessed that her search for romance outside their marriage wasn't about love, it was about filling a silence she couldn't explain. Mark admitted that though he never crossed the line, he had sought comfort in conversations with someone else because he felt unseen. It wasn't just betrayal that broke them, it was neglect, unspoken words, and the absence of intimacy that left both of them vulnerable. In the end, neither promised forever. Instead, they promised honesty, whatever form their future might take. Some wounds could heal, others might scar, but both knew pretending was no longer an option. The resolution wasn't about a perfect happy ending, it was about facing reality, about owning mistakes, and about allowing each other the dignity to choose what came next. As Julia left for work that morning, she looked back at Mark one last time, and in his eyes, she saw both pain and possibility. Stories like this remind us that love is fragile, trust is priceless, and secrets, no matter how small, can change everything. What do you think? Should Julia and Mark try to rebuild, or is it too late for second chances? Comment below with your thoughts, and let us know if you'd like to see a sequel to this story.